Alright, today we're going to be covering airless paint sprayer safety. Airless sprayers are a little more dangerous than a lot of other spray equipment due to the high pressure associated with using them. So today we're going to cover helpful and necessary safety tips. First off, you want to make sure you use goggles or glasses when using an airless sprayer. That can prevent any paint from being splashed into your eyes or accidentally getting in your eyes while you're painting. Safety glasses are good no matter how we're painting. We'll also need a respirator, which I'll show you in a moment. And before we do that, we'll go over the unit itself to show you proper safety tips. So on the unit itself, before we use it, we're going to want to check all of our fittings. You can see we have connections here and here. At this point, this unit doesn't have a hose hooked up. We will be using a unit that has everything connected. And we want to make sure that all those fittings are tight. Anywhere where you have a hose coming off the unit, this is our pickup tube, we want to make sure that's tight as well. If any of these are loose, we could have paint start squirting or a hose have an issue and they explode. So we want to make sure that that's tight and there's no leaking. You want to make sure the body is tight into the unit itself. If you have a fluid manifold coming off the pump, much like you see here. And we want to make sure that our hoses, especially our airless hose, is rated at least at the same pressure, if not higher, than the unit is capable of providing. So this is a 40-to-1 ratio pump. If I put 100 pounds of air into it, I get 4,000 psi of fluid pressure out of this unit. So we'd want to make sure our airless is rated at least at 4,500 psi, which would be the hose we'd hook up here. We also see a grounding cable up here. This is to prevent any static charge from building in the unit, which during painting, if you have a material that was flammable, could create a static discharge from this unit into the paint, creating a source of ignition. So you want to make sure this is connected to a true earth. All right, as I mentioned, a respirator is also critical when using any sprayer, whether it's an airless or a spray gun. This will keep any harmful chemicals from your paints from getting in your lungs and causing any harm. Now, you want to check your MSDS sheet on your paints prior to using a particular respirator. If it has isocyanates inside your paint, a typical respirator, you won't notice if your cartridges need to be replaced. Isocyanates are odorless and tasteless. It can oftentimes make sense. You either need to aggressively replace cartridges so that you don't have any concerns, or you could consider an air-fed hood respirator. These are pretty easy to wear. It's good to get fit tested for these prior to using them. That'll ensure that you don't have any health concerns with using a standard respirator, which again, if you do, you could also consider a force-fed air hood as an alternative. They're easy to wear. If you smell any chemicals while wearing them, whether it be your paint or thinner, it's probably time to change your cartridges. When these aren't in use, these cartridges will absorb any odor from the outside atmosphere or around you. So you'd want to store this in a plastic bag and keep it relatively airtight. That will greatly prolong the life of your respirator. They're easy to put on, and with this on, we'll be relatively safe and ready to go, along with my glasses. So that's critical gear for airless spraying. All right, so the way we work, before we hook anything up, we make sure everything's backed off, and at that point we can connect our airline up to the unit. We also have a safety up here that prevents air from moving the fluid section, and then this is our dump valve, which primes the pump itself before priming the line. When we are first getting started, we'll want to make sure this is open to flush out anything that's in the pump and start priming with our new material. So we'll go ahead and open up the safety up here. You notice we won't see any movement as I don't have any pressure on my actual pump yet. Then we can slowly increase pressure to the pump until we start seeing some movement. I'll also make sure my dump valve's open, and we'll start till we just start getting the pump to move. Should be around 20 pounds. So I'm getting the material primed. You want to keep this down in the bucket so there's any splash won't get to you. And at that point, I can go ahead, I can close this off, and that'll begin priming my line. As we mentioned, we wanted to make sure all of our lines were tight and all that, so there's no issues with leaking. We did that already, so we're safe there. At this point, our gun is primed out to this gun about. This is actually an air assist gun, but the principles apply to either gun. An air assist just adds assist air instead of just fluid pressure alone. The main thing with the gun itself, we always want to consider this to be dangerous from here forward. The high pressure of an airless gun can create injection injuries where paint is injected under the skin. So you want to think of this part forward as you would of any loaded weapon, that would create harm. So you don't want that to point near anybody or anything at any time. You always want to keep that pointed away when making adjustments and all. We then can go ahead and increase pressure and see when we start getting a fan of material out to the gun. In this case, I'll have to bleed my line of what's in it. The other thing with this airless unit, we always want to leave the duckbill on. That's a safety feature that keeps your hand from getting extremely close to the gun and will hopefully reduce any risk of skin impingement or anything like that. You'll also notice, you may not hear it very well, but the paint booth is on behind me. If we're spraying indoors in a stationary area, safety regulations suggest you have a paint booth or the proper equivalent to do indoor spraying. We adjusted this unit up to pressure. We can go ahead and paint. Say I get a tip plug. I do have a twist tip, and I try to flip the twist tip, and I can't purge it. I need to do some work on my gun. To be safe with that, I would go ahead and bleed all pressure off this unit. So you can see here, I'll turn this gauge till there's no pressure left on it. This would be the same if I'm changing paints or doing any other sort of work like it. I'd close that safety valve, and then to bleed additional pressure off, I could open this dump valve, which would bleed off any residual. You can actually see on my gauge here, which I have just for you to reference, that stopped, that actually bled down to 0. And I can my last step is pull the trigger. At that point, I know I don't have any pressure on the unit or on the pump, and I could safely work on this without any risk of shooting or injecting somebody with any fluid. So that's the basics of airless sprayer safety.